Okay, so we have covered the three isms: conservatism, liberalism, and nationalism. Then we covered the revolutions of the early 1815s and 1830s. You need to know the exception there in the early revolutions was just the Greeks before 1830. And then we had the Belgium Revolution being our exception in our 1830s revolutions. Then we talked about reforms in England, and now we're ready to come back to more revolutions, the revolutions of 1848. So just an overview of this time period, then we'll go through each region individually. Revolutions are going to break out again, but these revolutions are more similar to 1789 than the revolutions that we just talked about. Maybe even similar to the 1989 post-World War II when Eastern Europe, after been taken over by communism after World War II, we have a revolt called the Springtime Revolt of the People in 1989. So it's more similar to these revolts than those that we've been talking about more recently. So the 1848 revolutions were influenced by nationalism, or this desire to be free, sovereign, and ruled by someone of your own nationality. Liberalism, which is the Enlightenment ideals of a constitution and rights. And Romanticism, which we're going to talk about in class on Wednesday, as well as economic dislocation and instability. And so we're going to see that the poor, the hungry, are going to be those part of the group that is rising up during these revolutions of 1848. So a thing to remember is that the continent is just now industrializing, but the workers class is still in those hard times of industrialization. Remember when we talked about industrialization in England, the first years were difficult, but yet the later years actually things improved for the workers. We're still in that difficult stage for workers in the continent. So keep that in mind as we go through the revolutions of 1848. We only have two exceptions here. Only Britain and Russia avoided significant upheaval during this time period. That'd be a great multiple choice test question. All of these but experienced revolutions in 1848. The liberal reforms we discussed, the slow and steady teapot, are going to prevent Britain from some serious discontent. And conservative oppression in Russia, remember we have, Alex and Nicholas being very reactionary leaders, are going to keep a thumb on the revolutions, not allow liberals to take hold. Neither liberals nor conservatives are really going to gain a permanent upper hand in this time period. So we're not going to see like a clear winner. It's going to result in the end of serfdom, however, in Austria and Germany. We're going to see universal male suffrage in France. That's going to be important to us here in this lecture. We'll see parliaments established in German states, although controlled still by princes and aristocrats. And we'll see it stimulated unification impulse in Prussia and Sardinia Piedmont, which will become important to us leading up to World War I. This is the last of the liberal revolutions dating back to the French Revolution, so just significant in this time period. So where are we going to start? France. When France sneezes, Europe, the rest of Europe catches a cold, says Metternich, for good reason. So let's journey back to France. We're going to pick up with the kind of the same pattern that happened in 1830. So even the pattern of using months to describe the revolution is continued. So we had the July revolutions in 1830, and now we're going to see the February revolution. There's going to be two parts to this revolution. The first part, we're going to see the working class and liberals were unhappy with King Louis Philippe. Remember, he was our bourgeoisie king that had come into power when we left France. Especially unhappy with his minister, Francois Guizot. Who opposed electoral reform. Liberals disliked him. They're going to get mad. They're going to do what French people do. They're going to revolt. They're going to build barricades. So this revolution, then the first stage of it, starts with the workers and the middle class individuals working together as a revolution. There's so much pressure placed on the king that he'll be forced to abdicate in February of 1848. And this will start the Second French Republic. So again, government change in France. At some point, we'll stop and review, and we'll follow France all the way through European history and see just how many governments that they go through, and that'll be during the end of the semester. The last republic, if you are not remembering when the first French Republic is, was under Robespierre. So now we're on our second French Republic. It will be led by Alphonse Lamartine, who allied with the bourgeoisie, so allied with our middle class. So it's the middle class and workers together leading this Revolution. Louis Blanc, who is pictured here, is our socialist thinker who is going to lead the working classes during this time. So we have the French Republic, led by liberal Alphonse Lamartine, so he's our representative of the middle class. And then you have Louis Blanc, who leads the working classes. And this is where things are going to start to get a little wonky. So we're going to have the demand for work for the unemployment. The socialists and those like Louis Blanc are going to say we need a republic that is willing to help the workers, that is willing to give them a job if they don't have one. And he calls for the creation of these national workshops that the republic creates, and they go through with it. They create workshops to provide work for the unemployed. They also abolish slavery in the empire because France is still kind of empiristic at this time. They create a 10-hour workday in Paris, and they abolish the death penalty. So we have these liberal reforms. But then what will happen is we have an April election for a new constituent assembly, and this is where we're going to start to see a break between our two groups that had worked together during the first phase of the revolution. We're going to see a conflict between liberal capitalists and socialists, so a division between the workers and the middle class. And this division comes over the middle class's fear of this socialism tinge. And, where does money come from when you create things like national workshops? From taxes. And so the middle class are very fearful of more and more being taken from them. On the flip side of that, we also have peasants in France worried about this socialist tinges or the national workshop, because the peasants are being taxed, but they're also poor. And they're like, well, what's being done for us? So we see some pushback here. It makes the workers mad that they're being kind of acted against, or these things are being tried to take away. And the workers are going to seek a revolutionary republic after Blanc was dropped from the assembly. So Blanc is kind of pushed out. The workshops are going to be closed. The workers get mad. This leads us into the second phase of the revolution, following the same pattern, named after a month, the June Days Revolution of 1848. So the second part of the revolution, the June Days Revolution, is caused by the government closing those national workshops and also dropping Blanc from the assembly. This is the part where at first our middle class and workers were together, but now there's going to be a split. And this will actually mark the beginning of class warfare in France between the bourgeoisie and the working class. Because of these difficulties here. Workers are going to seek a war against poverty and a redistribution of income. We'll see that barricades are put up in the streets to oppose government forces. I put Les Mis here. It's really based off the 1830s revolution, but very similar revolution here in pattern. So a lot of the times you'll see a combination of the two when people talk about Les Mis. You just need to know it comes from these later revolutionary time periods, not 1789. So General Cavaignac assumed dictatorial powers during this time and crushes the revolt, leading 10,000 people dead. And during this time, the military is actually going to take over. They have to step in to keep things under control. This is a temporary victory for the conservatives. It's almost kind of like during the Egyptian revolution when the military stepped in there, and then we thought all this democratic stuff would happen after, but the military having to step in when things get crazy. And so a little similar there, but anyway, the conservatives' temporary victory. But remember, there's going to be no upper hand of either liberal or conservatives for long periods of time. So this will lead to an election in 1848 of Louis Napoleon. So we've had lots of Louis, we've had Napoleon, so now we end up with a Louis Napoleon. He's the nephew of Napoleon, so not just named after Napoleon, the actual nephew. And he's going to defeat Cavaignac, our military ruler who had stepped up and assumed dictatorial powers, and become president of the republic. They will create a new constitution with a strong president here and have this election. It is at this time period that all adult males can vote in France. You need to know that, circle it, underline it, because France at this time period in history will have the widest suffrage at this point in the world. So you could say that, I don't know, is that successful? Even though we're going to see that the revolution doesn't end how they started, we are going to end up with universal male suffrage. So In 1852, then Louis Napoleon will consolidate power and become Emperor Napoleon III of the Second French Empire. What you need to know is, first of all, to even have become the president, he had the majority of the vote. He was voted for by conservatives, by the working class, and for poor people. Conservatives like the name. They're like, oh, look, Napoleon, that means order and old, the old government. And then the working class and poor, his speeches were geared towards them. And so he comes in pretty unanimously of our new universal male suffrage. And then when he consolidates power not too long after and becomes emperor, 90% of these individuals of the universal male suffrage vote for him to be emperor. And this is where he changes to Napoleon III of the Second French Empire. So I don't know, overall successful for French. We've ended up back with the emperor. So I don't know, we'll kind of follow this through. So let's talk about Italy next. So we know that France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches a cold. Let's see what cold Italy catches. Okay, so Italian nationalists and liberals sought to end foreign domination of Italy. They see this, they're like, hey, we want these foreign people out of Italy. So in 1848, Milan, Lombardy, and Venetia expel Austrian rulers. So at first, we're going to see them successful. Bourbon rulers in Sicily and Naples will be defeated in the Kingdom of Two Sicilies. And then Sardinia, Piedmont will declare war on Austria. And it's like, yay, look, we can do this. So very successful at the beginning. We have Giuseppe Mazzini establishing the Roman Republic in 1849, and he was protected by Giuseppe Garibaldi and his forces. So we have Giuseppe and Giuseppe. Of course, they have to have the same name, but you need to know the difference between Mazzini and Garibaldi, and we will talk about them in more detail later. They'll even force Pope Pius IX out to flee Rome. But then, like most of these revolutions, we're going to see failure because they aren't as unified or as powerful as Austria, as are conservatives. They just haven't had the time to be A, as organized, B, as powerful, C, as far thinking as they need to be. Not at this time anyway. So the failure of revolutions in Italy is going to result in conservative victory. Austrian General Radetzky is going to crush Sardinia, Piedmont, regaining Lombardy and Venetia. French troops took back the Papal States. Like I said, the causes for failure here and for a lot of these revolutions in 1848 are going to be that A, it's mainly in the city, so you don't have the full population, such as the rural individuals, united. Revolutionaries in general were not united, as was also the case in Germany. So they're not, like we saw in France too, the middle class and workers will divide. So even the revolutionaries aren't unified. A fear of radicals among moderates, and lack of leadership and administrative experience among revolutionaries are some of the key failures of 1848 revolution. Next we have, so you count that one as a fail. And then next we'll have Austria, which this is Metternich's big fear, this revolution spreading to his part of the world. So as we've discussed, the Habsburg Empire was vulnerable to revolutionary challenge of nationalists. Metternich knew this. He knew the multi-ethnic nature of the Habsburg Empire would lead it to be kind of a breeding ground for liberals and nationalists to want to come in. The ethnic minorities sought nationalistic goals, such as the Hungarian, Slavs, Czechs, Italians, Serbs, Croats, and other. More non-Germans than Germans lived in the empire. Germans only made up 25% of the population, so we're going to see this multi-ethnic really being a problem, just as Metternich had really been concerned about since the Congress of Vienna. Austrian government, as we've talked about, was very reactionary, just like Russia. Metternich, very reactionary. And liberal institutions were non-existent, really. They've been prevented from coming in. Social reliance on serfdom doomed the masses of people to a life without help. But the February Revolution in France sparked rebellion for liberal reforms. So although it's been held back, Metternich's biggest fear about France sneezing is going to come true, because we're going to start to see some smuggling of those liberal reforms into the empire. So Hungary, or the Magyars, under Louis Kossuth, a Hungarian Magyar leader, are going to begin demanding independence. And along with the Czechs in Bohemia, are going to start to put pressure on the Austrian government. Because of this pressure, the Austrian Empire is actually going to collapse. Students and workers are going to stage mass demonstrations. Metternich will have to flee the country. Hungarian armies are going to drive within sight of Vienna, all because of these ideas that are able to be smuggled in after the February Revolution in France. But, we always have a big but here in these revolutions, the Hungarians, even though off to a great start, will be ultimately defeated because of the weaknesses we talked about in these revolutionary groups. The Austrian army will regroup and gain aid of Slavic minorities who resisted the Magyar invasion. There's not 100% Magyars, so we have, that there's again, that problem of not being unified, not having everyone on the same side. The Austrian and Russian armies are going to defeat the Hungarian army, and Hungary would have to wait until 1866 for autonomy. The revolution ultimately fails. The revolutionary government failed to govern effectively, as was the case in Italy that we just saw. And the Habsburg are going to restore royal absolutism with their last emperor, who will rule for a very long time, Frederick Wilhelm IV, or Franz Joseph. The last emperor for the Habsburgs will be Franz Joseph. And then as we get down to Bohemia and the German states, we're going to see Frederick Wilhelm IV. So sorry about that. Spoke out of turn. So Franz Joseph restored for royal absolutism for the Habsburgs. So speaking of Bohemia and moving towards the German states, the Slavs at the Prague Conference in 1848 are going to develop the notion of Austroslavism, which is a constitution and autonomy within the Habsburg Empire. They're going to say, like, we can be Slavs from within the Austrian Empire. Maybe we don't have to break totally free, but we want to be recognized and have, autonomy within. The Pan-Slav Congress is going to fail to unite the Slavic peoples in the empire, and the Austrian military will ultimately occupy Bohemia and crush the rebellion. And so we're going to see this checklist failure as well. And then that moves us into our German states with Friedrich Wilhelm IV and the Bund. So these revolutions in the German states, or the Bund, as we've talked about, will also be inspired by the 1848 revolutions in France. Liberals will demand a constitutional government and a union or federation of German states. Now, the Hohenzollern king, Frederick Wilhelm IV, had at first supported this. He's like, I'm the king. I could also probably be the king here. But as he starts to get some more counsel and realize that things might get out of hand and ultimately that might leave him with less power, he changes his mind. But the problem is he's already sent these people out to create a constitution. He's already sent these revolutionaries out to create a constitution before he changes his mind. And so they go out and create this Frankfurt Parliament on May of 1848, and the liberal, nationalist, and romantic leaders called for elections to a constituent assembly from all states in the German Bund for the purpose of unifying the German states. And then they're going to seek war even with Denmark to annex Schleswig and Holstein, which I have a map here, which are the northern provinces. So they're going to try to take those from Denmark. So here you can see those provinces that they're going to try to take back. In response to this, Prussia is going to also declare war on Denmark to try to annex these. And the Frankfurt Parliament, already in motion, has created a constitution that Friedrich Wilhelm IV asked them to for a united German federation. And, of course, since he has been playing a role in this and they think that he's still on board, they select the Prussian king, Friedrich Wilhelm IV, as emperor under their constitution. Frederick Wilhelm IV, however, is going to reject the liberal constitution, saying, you don't make me king, God does. So he reaches back to absolutism after changing his mind. He could claim divine right of kings, and allegedly stated he would not accept the crown from the gutter, or therefore I will not accept the crown from you little peons. And he will go from there then to impose a conservative constitution that guaranteed royal control of the government that will last until 1918. The failure of Prussia and Austria to support the unification movement is going to result in its collapse. And Frederick William's attempt to subsequently unify Germany, as his initial dream had been before kind of, backing out here with some fear is going to end in failure, and he has to back down from doing so. This is going to be called the humiliation of Olmütz, where Prussia dropped the plan to unify Germany, leaving Austria as the dominant German state in the Bund. And so this is the humiliation factor here. This like all kind of falls apart, and instead of unifying and being more powerful, Prussia is going to kind of be dropped by Austria. Don't worry, however, we're going to see Prussia seek revenge in 1866 in the Austro-Prussian War, and so we'll be coming up on that shortly. So let's evaluate these revolutions of 1848. So again, no one is really winning. You wouldn't have a victor out of all of this. Neither liberal or nationalist revolutionaries nor those of conservatism were able to maintain their dominance between 1789 and 1848. Liberalism, nationalism, socialism, and democracy made some gains, but then will largely be kept in check by conservatives, so 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. Many of the revolutions were spontaneous movements that could not effectively maintain popular support. As we've talked about, these revolutions were largely urban movements or city-based, so we don't have support of everyone out in the countryside. The middle classes who led the revolutions came to fear the radicalism of their working class allies, the example we saw in France. So we see a separation even within our revolutionaries. Division among nationalistic ethnic groups in the Austrian Empire helped destroy the revolutionary movements against the empire. So Austria and Prussia not being able to unify there, nor having our ethnic groups being able to, will halt that. We'll also, however, have some positive aspects. So there's all of the negative. We don't really kind of move anywhere. No one takes the lead or the reins, but positive, we saw universal male suffrage introduced in France. Important. This is like the 3rd time I've said it, so you'll need to know that. They are ahead of the rest of the world with votes. They went from 200,000 to 9 million votes in this time period, so very important. Serfdom will remain abolished in Austria and the German states after the revolutions of 1848. Parliaments were established in Prussia, although they're still under the control of the king, as we saw, and other German states, although dominated, as we'll see, by princes and aristocrats and the king. Prussia and Sardinia Piedmont emerged with new energy to achieve unification within the next 2 decades, so we're going to see that coming up as important. And then the revolutions of 1848 to 1849 brought to a close the era of liberal revolutions that had begun in France in 1789. So we can kind of close this chapter where we started in 1789 with the French Revolution, right before Christmas break. We can kind of close this revolutionary period because it's going to change. Reformers and revolutionists had learned during this time period that planning and organization would be necessary for their success, and that rational argument and revolution would not always assure success, that they had to go beyond these dreams and going forward. And so we're going to see this age of romanticism. So romanticism is the time period we've been in right now, like I can dream it, I can achieve it. We're going to see that this is going to give way as they do not see the achievement of their dream, to an age of realism that we will come to in the next unit. So we're going to talk just about our last ism, or not last ism, next to last ism. We have romanticism and socialism next week. So we're going to talk about these dreamers of the revolutions in the terms of romanticism from 1800 to 1850 on Wednesday. And then on Friday, we'll talk about socialism in your DBQ and be set to go. So have a great holiday weekend. You have 2 days left. Don't forget to read chapter 16, and I will see you on Wednesday.